Wife found a hidden safe in the house, and her life was never the same. Hi everyone! Before we get into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel's reach has been dropping a bit, and one of the best ways you can support us is by subscribing. It's quick, free, and helps us keep bringing you new and interesting stories. Your support means the world to us, and together, we can grow this channel. Thank you so much. Now let's get to today's story. I'm writing from a temporary account for obvious reasons, and I've changed some details to protect my anonymity. The morning light filtered through the kitchen curtains as Sarah wiped down the counters for what felt like the 100th time that week. 17 years of marriage had taught her the rhythm of their suburban life. David left for his accounting firm at 7:30 sharp, returned by 6 for dinner, and spent evenings in his study reviewing client files or watching the news. Their routine was as predictable as sunrise, and until that Tuesday in October, Sarah had found comfort in its reliability. She had decided to rearrange the living room furniture while David was at work. The heavy oak bookshelf had stood against the west wall for so long that she'd forgotten what the room looked like without it there. With considerable effort, she managed to slide it away from the wall, revealing a rectangle of unfaded paint and something else. At first, Sarah thought it was just a shadow or a stain on the wall. But as she looked closer, running her fingers along what she now realized was a seam in the wallpaper, her heart began to race. The paper here was newer, different from the rest of the room. With growing curiosity, she pressed against it and felt it give slightly. After 20 minutes of careful work with a utility knife, Sarah had peeled away enough wallpaper to reveal what lay beneath. A small safe, built directly into the wall and painted to match the surrounding surface. It was no bigger than a shoebox, with a digital keypad that glowed faintly red when she touched it. Sarah sat back on her heels, staring at the safe as if it might disappear if she looked away. In all their years together, David had never mentioned it. They had renovated this room twice once when they first moved in, and again 5 years ago when Sarah had insisted on new hardwood floors. How had she never noticed it? How had the contractors not found it? But even as these questions swirled in her mind, a deeper, more troubling thought began to take root. David knew about this safe. He had to know. And if he knew about it, but had never told her, what did that mean? The sound of his car in the driveway that evening made her jump. She had spent the afternoon pushing the bookshelf back into place, but the knowledge of what lay behind it seemed to pulse through the wall like a heartbeat. When David walked through the front door with his usual, "Hey honey, I'm home," Sarah found herself studying his face with new intensity. "How was your day?" she asked, her voice sounding strange and forced to her own ears. David loosened his tie and kissed her cheek. "Same as always. Johnson's quarterly reports are a mess, but what else is new?" He paused, looking at her more closely. "You okay? You seem tense." "Just tired. I did some cleaning today." "Cleaning?" David's eyes flickered almost imperceptibly toward the living room. "Anything? Major?" Sarah's pulse quickened. The question felt loaded, careful. "Just dusting. Moved some furniture around." She watched as David nodded, but there was something different in his expression now. A wariness that hadn't been there moments before. That night, as they lay in bed, Sarah found herself listening to his breathing, wondering what other secrets might be hiding behind the walls of their home. The next few days passed in a haze of nervous energy. Sarah found herself making excuses to go into the living room, always glancing at the bookshelf, always wondering. She began to pay attention to David's habits in a way she never had before. The way he always checked that the front door was locked twice before bed. The way he kept his phone face down on the nightstand. The way he sometimes received calls that he would answer in another room, speaking in hushed tones. Had he always been so secretive? Or was she only noticing now because her eyes had been opened to the possibility that the man she had shared her life with for nearly 2 decades might be a stranger? On Friday morning, after David left for work, Sarah couldn't stand it anymore. She moved the bookshelf aside with shaking hands, revealing the safe once more. The digital display stared back at her, waiting for a code she didn't know. She tried their anniversary date first, 06112. The display flashed red and beeped softly. Then David's birthday, 11/29. Red again. Her own birthday, the date they'd bought the house, their daughter Emma's birthday, all met with the same defiant red glow. Sarah sat cross-legged on the floor, staring at the safe, her mind racing through possibilities. What would David use as a code? Something meaningful to him, but not obvious to anyone else. She thought about his habits, his interests, his past. Then she remembered something from early in their marriage. David had mentioned a childhood friend named Marcus, who had died in a car accident when they were both 22. She had never heard him talk about Marcus again, but she remembered how his face had changed when he told her the story, a shadow crossing his features that she had attributed to grief. Marcus's birthday. David had mentioned it once, years ago, when they'd passed a cemetery on that date. April 15th. U4015. The display flashed green, and Sarah heard the soft click of tumblers falling into place. Her hands trembled as she pulled the heavy door open. Inside, the safe was divided into several compartments, each containing items that made Sarah's world shift a little further off its axis. In the first compartment, bundles of cash, more money than Sarah had ever seen in one place. $20 bills bound with rubber bands, easily $50,000 or more. In the second, a passport she didn't recognize, bearing David's photo, but a different name, Michael Patterson. The third compartment held a manila envelope thick with documents. Sarah pulled out the envelope with numb fingers and opened it. Inside were papers that made no sense at first, legal documents, birth certificates, marriage certificates. But as she read more carefully, a horrifying picture began to emerge. David Morse, her David, had been married before. Not just married, but married to someone else while he was married to her. The documents showed a marriage to a woman named Linda Patterson in Phoenix, Arizona, dated 3 years after Sarah and David's own wedding. There were photographs, David with his arm around a dark-haired woman and 2 young children, all of them smiling at the camera with the easy familiarity of a family. But that wasn't the worst of it. At the bottom of the pile were newspaper clippings, yellowed with age. The headlines made Sarah's blood run cold. Local family dies in house fire. Police investigate suspicious blaze. Husband questioned in family's death. Michael Patterson missing after family tragedy. The articles detailed how Linda Patterson and her 2 children ages 8 and 6 had died in a fire that destroyed their Phoenix home 5 years ago. The husband, Michael Patterson, had supposedly been out of town on business when the fire occurred, but had disappeared before police could complete their investigation. The fire had been ruled suspicious, with evidence of accelerant found in multiple rooms. Sarah's hands were shaking so violently now that she could barely hold the clippings. The man in the photographs was definitely David Younger, thinner, but unmistakably him. And the dates lined up perfectly. 5 years ago was when David had gone through what he'd called a difficult period at work, when he'd been stressed and distant for months. It was also around the time he'd insisted they install a new security system in their house, claiming there had been break-ins in the neighborhood. She forced herself to keep reading. The articles mentioned that Michael Patterson had worked as an accountant, just like David. They described him as quiet and unremarkable, the kind of man who could disappear into a crowd, the kind of man who could start over somewhere new with a different identity. The sound of a car door slamming made Sarah's head snap up. She glanced at the clock on the mantel. It was only 3 o'clock. David wasn't supposed to be home for hours. Through the front window, she could see him walking up the front path, his face grim and purposeful. Sarah's mind raced. The bookshelf was still pushed away from the wall. The safe was open. The documents were scattered on the floor around her. There was no way to hide what she had discovered, no way to pretend this moment wasn't happening. The front door opened. "Sarah?" David's voice carried a tension she had never heard before. "I came home early. We need to talk. She heard his footsteps in the hallway, getting closer. In desperation, she began shoving the documents back into the envelope, but her hands were shaking too badly to be effective. The passport fell to the floor, landing face up so that the name Michael Patterson seemed to glow in the afternoon light. David appeared in the living room doorway and stopped dead. For a long moment, they stared at each other across the room, Sarah on her knees beside the open safe, surrounded by evidence of his double life, and David frozen in the doorway like a deer caught in headlights. "I can explain," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Can you?" Sarah's voice cracked. "Can you explain why you have a passport with a different name? Can you explain why there are newspaper articles in here about a family that burned to death? Can you explain why you've been lying to me for 17 years? David stepped into the room slowly, his hands raised as if she were a wild animal that might bolt. "Sarah, please, let me tell you the truth." "The truth?" Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I don't even know what that means anymore. Is your name even David? Are you even an accountant? Is anything about our life real?" "Our life is real," David said desperately. "You are real. Emma is real. Everything I feel for you is real. But the rest of it? Michael Patterson? Phoenix? That family?" Sarah held up one of the newspaper clippings with a trembling hand. "This woman and her children, did you kill them, David? Did you murder them and then come home to me and pretend everything was normal?" David's face went pale. It wasn't like that. You don't understand." "Then make me understand," Sarah screamed, rising to her feet. "Make me understand how the man I've loved and trusted for 17 years could have another family, another life, another identity." David ran his hands through his hair, a gesture she had seen him make thousands of times when he was stressed about work. But now she wondered if he had ever been stressed about work, or if there had always been bigger concerns occupying his mind. "I was running," he said finally. "When I came here, when I met you, I was running from something terrible. From murdering your family? No." The word exploded from him. "I would never. Sarah, I loved Linda. I loved those kids like they were my own. When they died, when I lost them." He trailed off, his eyes filling with tears she had rarely seen in all their years together. Sarah stared at him, trying to reconcile this display of emotion with the cold, calculated deception the safe had revealed. "Then why did you run? If you didn't do anything wrong, why did you disappear?" David sat heavily on the couch, suddenly looking older than his 52 years. "Because I knew how it looked. Linda had a life insurance policy, a big one. I had been having problems with my business, money troubles she didn't know about. And there were other things that made me look guilty." "What things?" "I had been having an affair." The words came out in a rush. "Not with you. This was before I met you. With a woman from work. Linda found out the day before she died. We had a terrible fight, and I left. I was supposed to be at a conference, but really I was. I was with the other woman, trying to figure out what to do." Sarah felt sick. "So when your wife and children burned to death, you were cheating on them?" "Yes." David's voice was barely audible. "And when the police started asking questions, when they found out about the affair and the insurance money and the fight we'd had, I knew I was going to be arrested for something I didn't do, so I ran." "And you just started over? Created a new identity?" "It wasn't that simple. I had help from someone who knew how to make people disappear. It cost me everything, all the money I had left. And then some. But it gave me a chance at a new life." Sarah felt the room spinning around her. "Our entire relationship, our marriage, it's all built on a lie." "No," David said fiercely. "Everything between us is real. When I met you, I wasn't planning to fall in love. I was just trying to survive, to build a quiet life where no one would look for me. But then you came along, and you were so beautiful and kind and genuine, and I couldn't help myself. You could have told me the truth." "When? On our first date?" Hi, I'm actually a fugitive from justice who may or may not have killed my family. How do you think that would have gone? Sarah had no answer for that. She sank back to the floor, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she had discovered. What about now? After all these years, why didn't you ever trust me enough to tell me? Because I was terrified, David admitted. Terrified that you would leave me. Terrified that you would think I was a monster. Terrified that I would lose the only good thing that had ever happened to me. And instead, I had to find out like this. Sarah gestured at the scattered contents of the safe. Why do you even keep all this? Why not throw it away and try to forget? Because I can't forget. Linda and the kids. They deserved better than what happened to them. Keeping their memory alive, even in this twisted way, was the only way I could honor them. Sarah stared at him. This man she had thought she knew completely. Do you still think about them? Every day, David whispered. Every single day. They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of 17 years of deception hanging between them like a physical presence. Sarah looked at the photographs scattered on the floor. David with another woman, other children. A life he had led while pretending to be someone else entirely. What am I supposed to do with this? She asked finally. What am I supposed to do with the knowledge that my husband is a fugitive? That our daughter's father might be a murderer? I'm not a murderer, David said urgently. Sarah, you have to believe me. I would never hurt anyone, especially not Linda and the kids. I loved them. But you hurt them anyway, didn't you? By cheating, by lying, by running away instead of staying to fight for their memory. David flinched, as if she had slapped him. You're right, I was a coward. I was selfish and weak, and I've spent every day since then trying to be better. Trying to be worthy of the second chance you gave me, even though you didn't know you were giving it. Sarah looked around the room, their room, filled with the furniture they had chosen together, the photographs of their life, the memories they had built. How much of it was real? How much was just another layer of David's carefully constructed lies? I need time, she said finally. I need to think about this. Of course. Take all the time you need. No, Sarah said, standing up. I need you to leave. I need you to pack a bag and go somewhere else while I figure out what to do with this information. David's face crumpled. Sarah, please, don't shut me out. We can work through this together. Together? Sarah's voice rose. We can't do anything together because I don't know who you are. I don't know if anything you've ever told me is true. I don't know if the man I fell in love with even exists, or if he's just another character you created to hide from the truth. He exists, David said desperately. The man who loves you, who loves Emma, who wants nothing more than to grow old with you. He's real. Everything else is just baggage. Baggage? Sarah stared at him in disbelief. You call a dead family baggage? You call 17 years of lies baggage? David realized his mistake immediately. That's not what I meant. I'm trying to explain that the important parts of our life are genuine. Get out, Sarah said quietly. What? Get out of this house, now, before I call the police and tell them where to find Michael Patterson. The threat hung between them like a blade. David's face went white, and for the first time since she had known him, Sarah saw real fear in his eyes. You wouldn't, he said. Wouldn't I? A few hours ago, I would have said I knew you well enough to predict what you'd do in any situation. Now I realize I don't know you at all, so maybe you don't know me either. David stood up slowly, his movements careful and deliberate. If I leave now, will you? Will you at least think about what I've told you? Will you consider that there might be more to the story than what you've read in those articles? I'll think about a lot of things, Sarah said, but I make no promises about what conclusions I'll reach. David nodded, understanding that this was the best offer he was going to get. I'll pack a few things and go to a hotel. But Sarah, please don't make any permanent decisions while you're angry. Please don't throw away 17 years without giving us a chance to work through this. Sarah watched him walk toward the stairs, then called after him, "David?" He turned back, hope flickering in his eyes. "Is Emma yours? Biologically, I mean. Or is that another lie?" The question seemed to cause him physical pain. "She's mine. Sarah, I swear to you, everything about Emma is real and true. She's the best part of both of us." After he left, Sarah sat alone in the living room with the contents of the safe spread around her, like the debris from an explosion. The photographs of David's other family seemed to stare at her accusingly, as if she were somehow complicit in whatever had happened to them. She picked up one of the newspaper articles and read it again, trying to find some detail she had missed that might exonerate the man she had married. But the facts were stark and unforgiving. Linda Patterson had died along with her 2 children in a fire that police suspected was arson. Michael Patterson David had disappeared immediately afterward. There was no ambiguity in the timeline, no room for interpretation. The worst part was that now, looking back on their years together, Sarah could see signs she had missed. David's reluctance to talk about his past, his insistence on handling all their financial affairs, the way he sometimes seemed to be listening for something when they were out in public, as if he expected to hear his name called by someone he didn't want to see. She had attributed these quirks to his introverted nature, his professional caution with money, his general anxiety about crowds. She had never imagined they were the behaviors of a man living under an assumed identity. Sarah's phone rang, startling her out of her thoughts. Emma's name appeared on the screen, their daughter, calling from college as she did every Wednesday evening. "Hi, sweetheart," Sarah answered, trying to keep her voice steady. "Mom, you sound weird. Are you okay?" "Just tired. How are your classes going?" As Emma chattered about her psychology major and her plans for spring break, Sarah found herself studying her daughter's voice for traces of David. Emma had his laugh, his way of pausing thoughtfully before answering a difficult question. She had his mathematical mind and his careful attention to detail. How could she explain to Emma that her father might be a fugitive, that the stable, loving family Emma had grown up in was built on a foundation of lies? That the man who had taught her to ride a bike and helped her with her homework and walked her to the school bus every morning for 12 years might have murdered his previous family? "Mom, are you still there?" "Yes, sorry, I'm here." "You're being super weird today. Where's Dad? Usually he's right there making faces at me through the phone." Sarah's throat tightened. "He's out. Work thing." On a Wednesday night? That's unusual for him. It was unusual. In all their years together, David had rarely worked late, never traveled for business, never missed dinner without calling ahead. She had thought it was because he valued family time. Now she wondered if it was because he couldn't risk the scrutiny that came with a more demanding career. After Emma hung up, Sarah sat in the growing darkness of the living room, surrounded by the evidence of her husband's secret life. She thought about calling her sister or her best friend from work, but how could she explain what she had discovered without sounding like she had lost her mind? Instead, she found herself reaching for her laptop. If David was telling the truth about being innocent, there might be more information online about the Phoenix fire. Maybe something that would support his version of events. What she found instead made her feel sick all over again. The Phoenix Police Department's cold case website had an entire section devoted to the Patterson family murders. Murders, not accidental deaths, as David had implied. The investigation had uncovered evidence that Linda Patterson and her children had been drugged before the fire started. Toxicology reports showed high levels of sedatives in their blood, far more than could be accounted for by smoke inhalation. The police had concluded that someone had deliberately incapacitated the family before setting the fire, making it impossible for them to escape. Michael Patterson remained their primary suspect, not just because of the insurance money and his affair, but because he was the only person with access to the house and intimate knowledge of the family's routines. Sarah closed the laptop, her hands shaking. The evidence was overwhelming. David Michael hadn't just run from suspicion, He had run from the truth, and now that truth was sitting in her living room, demanding that she decide what to do with it. The next few days passed in a blur of anguish and indecision. David called several times, but Sarah let the calls go to voicemail. His messages grew increasingly desperate. "Sarah, please call me back. I know how this looks, but there are things you don't understand. I found a lawyer who specializes in cold cases. He thinks we can clear this up if we approach it the right way." Emma called me, asking where I was. I told her I was on a business trip. Please don't let this destroy her world until we know what we're going to do. Sarah couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't concentrate on anything except the terrible choice that lay before her. She could report David to the police and watch him be arrested for murder. She could keep his secret and continue living a lie. Or she could confront him one more time and try to find some middle ground between those two unthinkable extremes. On Saturday morning, she called him. "Sarah?" David's voice was rough with exhaustion and hope. "Thank God. Are you okay?" "No, I'm not okay. I need to see you. Can you come to the house?" "Of course. I'll be right there." He arrived within 20 minutes, looking haggard and desperate. Sarah led him to the living room, where she had left the safe open and its contents displayed on the coffee table like evidence at a trial. "I've been doing research," she said without preamble, "about the fire, about Linda and the children." David's face went pale. "Sarah." "They were drugged, David. The police found sedatives in their blood. Someone gave them drugs to make sure they couldn't escape, and then set the house on fire. That's not an accident or a tragic coincidence. That's murder." "I know how it looks," David began, but Sarah cut him off. "How it looks? It looks like you killed your family for insurance money, then created a new identity and started over. It looks like I've been married to a murderer for 17 years. "But you know me," David said urgently. "You know what kind of person I am. Do I seem like someone who could do something like that?" The terrible thing was, he didn't. The man sitting across from her, pleading for her understanding, seemed exactly like the gentle, caring husband she had always known. But Sarah had learned that her perception meant nothing. She had been wrong about David in ways she was still discovering. "I don't know what kind of person you are," she said. "That's the problem." "Then let me tell you," David said. "Let me tell you about that night, about what really happened." Against her better judgment, Sarah found herself listening. "Linda had found out about my affair 2 days before the fire," David began. "She was furious, devastated. She said she wanted me out of the house, wanted a divorce. I was supposed to leave that weekend." "But you didn't." "No, I was staying at a hotel, trying to figure out what to do. The other woman, her name was Jennifer. She was pressuring me to leave Linda anyway, said it was time to start over, just the two of us. But I loved Linda, and I loved the kids. I didn't want to lose them." Sarah felt a bitter laugh escape her. "So your solution was to murder them?" "No!" David's voice cracked. "I would never." "Sarah, I went to the house that night to try to talk to Linda, to apologize, to beg her to give me another chance. When I got there, the house was already on fire." "The police said you were out of town." "I was supposed to be. I had told Jennifer I was going to a conference in Denver, but really, I had driven back to try to save my marriage. When I saw the flames, I tried to get inside, but it was too late. The fire department was already there, and they wouldn't let me near the building." Sarah studied his face, looking for signs of deception. "Then why did you run? If you were innocent, why didn't you stay and explain?" "Because I knew how it would look. I had lied about being at the conference. I couldn't account for my whereabouts when the fire started. And when the police found out about the insurance policy and my affair..." David shrugged helplessly. "I panicked. I thought they would arrest me first and ask questions later." "What about the sedatives? How do you explain that?" David's face crumpled. "I don't know. Maybe someone else was involved. Someone who wanted to hurt Linda or the kids. Maybe it was connected to something from her past, not mine. But I swear to you, Sarah, I had nothing to do with it." Sarah wanted to believe him. Part of her desperately wanted to accept his explanation and return to the comfortable illusion of their life together. But the rational part of her mind couldn't ignore the evidence. "Even if that's true," she said, "you're still a fugitive. You're still living under a false identity. Our marriage isn't even legal. You're technically still married to a dead woman." "We can fix that," David said quickly. "We can hire lawyers, clear my name, make everything legitimate. It won't be easy, but it's possible." "And in the meantime, what am I supposed to tell Emma when she asks why her father is being investigated for murder? What am I supposed to tell our friends, our neighbors, everyone who thinks they know us?" David had no answer for that. Sarah stood up and walked to the window, looking out at their quiet suburban street. Mrs. Chen was walking her dog. The Martinezes were washing their car. Normal people living normal lives, unencumbered by the kind of secrets that could destroy everything in an instant. "I can't do this," she said finally. "Sarah, please." "No, David, or Michael, whoever you are." She turned to face him. "I can't live with this knowledge. I can't pretend everything is normal when it's not. And I can't spend the rest of my life wondering if the man I'm married to is a killer." "So what does that mean?" Sarah had been wrestling with that question for days, and she finally had an answer. "It means you have a choice to make. You can turn yourself in, cooperate with the police, and try to clear your name the right way. Or I will call them myself and tell them where to find Michael Patterson." David stared at her, his face cycling through shock, anger, and resignation. "You're giving me an ultimatum." "Yes, I am. And if I turn myself in and the police don't believe my story? If I'm convicted of something I didn't do? Then at least Emma and I will know that you tried to make things right, that you finally chose the truth over running away." David was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands. When he finally looked up, his eyes were filled with tears. "What about us? What about our marriage?" "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "Maybe if you're cleared, if you can prove your innocence, we can find a way to rebuild. But I can't make any promises. Too much has changed." "And if I'm convicted?" Sarah's throat tightened. "Then I'll explain to Emma that her father was a good man who made some terrible mistakes, and that sometimes good people end up paying for things they didn't do." David nodded slowly. "How long do I have to decide?" 24 hours. After he left, Sarah called in sick to work and spent the day cleaning house with manic intensity. She scrubbed floors, organized closets, and threw away years' worth of accumulated clutter. It was as if she could somehow cleanse her life of David's deception by eliminating every trace of disorder from their home. But no amount of cleaning could erase the fundamental question that haunted her. Was she married to a murderer? That night, she dreamed of Linda Patterson and her children. In the dream, they stood in Sarah's living room, their faces accusatory, asking why she hadn't called the police yet. When she woke, Sarah was crying. David called at exactly noon the next day. "I've made my decision," he said. "I'm going to turn myself in." Sarah felt a rush of relief mixed with terror. "When?" "This afternoon. I've contacted a lawyer in Phoenix who specializes in cold cases. He's going to meet me at the police station." "David." "I know this might be the last time we talk for a while," he interrupted. "I need you to know that everything I told you about loving you and Emma is true. Whatever happens next, that part of my life, our life, was real." "I know," Sarah whispered. Will you tell Emma what's happening? I can't bear the thought of her finding out from the news." "Yes, I'll tell her." "Thank you." After he hung up, Sarah sat in the silence of their house, surrounded by 17 years of shared memories. On the mantel were photographs of their wedding, Emma's birth, family vacations, Christmas mornings. A life that had seemed solid and permanent just a week ago now felt as fragile as tissue paper. She called Emma and asked her to come home for the weekend, claiming there was something important they needed to discuss. Then she began the painful process of figuring out how to explain to her daughter that her father might be going to prison for murder. The arrest made the national news. "Fugitive captured after 20 years," screamed the headlines, accompanied by photos of David being led away in handcuffs. The story quickly spread to social media, where amateur detectives and true crime enthusiasts dissected every detail of the Patterson family murders and speculated about David's guilt or innocence. Sarah's phone rang constantly, reporters, neighbors, people she hadn't spoken to in years, all wanting to know how it felt to discover she was married to a suspected killer. She stopped answering, but the messages piled up. "Sarah, this is Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 News. We'd love to get your perspective on your husband's arrest." "Hi, Sarah, it's Beth from Book Club. I can't believe what I'm seeing on the news. Call me if you need anything." "Mrs. Morse, this is Detective Rodriguez with Phoenix PD. We'd like to speak with you about your husband's activities over the past 20 years. Emma came home that weekend, devastated and confused. Sarah had tried to explain the situation gently, but there was no easy way to tell someone that their father was suspected of murdering his previous family. "I don't understand," Emma kept saying. "Dad wouldn't hurt anyone. He's never even raised his voice at us." "Duh, I know, sweetheart. This is all very confusing." "But you turned him in. If you thought he was innocent, why did you make him go to the police?" It was a question Sarah had been asking herself, because sometimes doing the right thing means accepting consequences we don't want to face. The trial began 8 months later. Sarah attended every day, sitting in the back of the courtroom, trying to reconcile the man in the defendant's chair with the husband she had thought she knew. The prosecution painted a picture of Michael Patterson as a cold, calculating killer who had murdered his family for money and then assumed a new identity to escape justice. They presented evidence of his affair, his financial troubles, his access to sedatives through a friend who worked at a veterinary clinic. The defense argued that Michael was an innocent man who had panicked when he realized how guilty he looked. They presented expert testimony suggesting the fire could have been set by someone else, that the sedatives could have been administered by an intruder, that Michael's flight was the action of a frightened man, not a guilty one. Sarah found herself believing both versions of the story at different moments. The evidence was compelling, but not conclusive. The man on trial looked like David, but seemed like a stranger. The life they had built together felt simultaneously real and completely false. After 3 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for 2 days before returning a verdict: not guilty. Sarah felt her knees give way as the foreman read the verdict. Around her, the courtroom erupted in noise, reporters shouting questions, David's lawyer pumping his fist in triumph, members of Linda Patterson's family crying in disappointment. David turned to look at her across the crowded courtroom, his eyes asking a question she wasn't ready to answer. That night, he called her from his hotel room in Phoenix. "I'm coming home," he said. "David, I don't think that's a good idea." "Why not? I was cleared. The jury said I was innocent." "The jury said there wasn't enough evidence to convict you. That's not the same thing as innocent." There was a long pause. "Do you think I did it, Sarah? After everything we've been through, do you really think I'm capable of murder?" Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the question. "I don't know what I think anymore. A year ago, I would have said absolutely not. But a year ago, I didn't know you had another family. I didn't know you were living under a false identity. I didn't know you were capable of lying to me every day for 17 years. So that's it? Our marriage is over?" "I don't know," Sarah said honestly. "I need time to figure out who I am now, who we are. This whole experience has changed me in ways I'm still discovering." "What about Emma?" "Emma is an adult. She can decide for herself what kind of relationship she wants to have with you." Another long pause. "Can I at least come get my things?" "I packed them already. They're in the garage." David's sharp intake of breath told her he understood the finality of that statement. "Sarah." "I'm sorry, David. I wish things could be different, but I can't unknow what I know. I can't go back to who I was before I found that safe." After she hung up, Sarah walked through the house that had been their home. Emma's room, frozen in time since she'd left for college. The kitchen where they'd shared thousands of meals. The bedroom where they'd made love and whispered their dreams in the darkness. In the living room, the bookshelf stood against the wall once again. Sarah had had the safe removed and the wall replastered. There was no trace left of the discovery that had shattered her world. But she could still feel it there, like a phantom limb. The knowledge that secrets could hide in plain sight, that the people we trust most completely might be strangers, that a life built on love could be undermined by lies told decades before. 3 months later, Emma graduated from college. David attended the ceremony, sitting several rows behind Sarah, respecting the boundaries she had established. Afterward, as families gathered for photos and celebrations, Sarah watched her daughter navigate the awkward reality of her parents' separation. Emma had chosen to maintain a relationship with David, though it was strained and careful. She called him every few weeks, visited him occasionally at his new apartment across town. She had told Sarah that she believed in his innocence, but that she understood why Sarah couldn't. "He's still my dad," Emma had said. "Whatever he did or didn't do before I was born, he was a good father to me." Sarah respected her daughter's choice, even as it left her feeling isolated in her certainty that their family could never be the same. A year after the trial, Sarah was loading groceries into her car when she noticed a woman watching her from across the parking lot. The woman was middle-aged, well-dressed, with graying hair and kind eyes. She looked familiar, but Sarah couldn't place her. The woman approached hesitantly. "Excuse me, are you Sarah Morse?" "Yes." "My name is Janet Patterson. Linda was my sister." Sarah's blood went cold. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you." Janet studied Sarah's face carefully. "I wanted to meet you, to thank you for what you did." "What I did?" "You turned him in. After all those years of wondering what happened to Linda and the kids, wondering if their killer would ever face justice, you made sure he couldn't hide anymore." Sarah felt uncomfortable under the woman's grateful gaze. "The jury found him not guilty." "Juries make mistakes," Janet said firmly. "But at least now everyone knows who Michael Patterson really is." At least Linda's story was finally told. After Janet left, Sarah sat in her car for a long time, thinking about the different ways people could interpret the same events. To Janet, Sarah was a hero who had brought a killer to justice. To Emma, she was a mother who had destroyed her family over ancient history. To David, she was the woman who had chosen suspicion over love. To herself, she was simply someone who had discovered that the truth was more complicated and more painful than she had ever imagined. Sarah eventually sold the house and moved to a smaller place across town. She returned to school to finish the degree she had abandoned when Emma was born, and eventually found work as a victim's advocate with the district attorney's office. She never remarried. David moved to another state and found work under his legal name. He sent Sarah a letter every year on their anniversary, never asking her to take him back, just telling her that he still loved her and always would. Sarah read these letters but never responded. Emma finished graduate school and became a therapist, specializing in helping families deal with trauma and betrayal. She sometimes wondered if her career choice was influenced by her parents' story, but she never regretted it. She maintained relationships with both her parents, though she never stopped hoping they might find their way back to each other. Years passed. Sarah grew older, grayer, more set in her solitary ways. She had male friends, went on occasional dates, but never let anyone get too close. The experience with David had taught her that love could survive on lies for decades, but truth, once revealed, could destroy everything in an instant. One evening, nearly 10 years after David's arrest, Sarah was watching the news when a story caught her attention. A man in Phoenix had been arrested for a series of home invasions and murders dating back 25 years. During his confession, he had admitted to killing the Patterson family, describing details that had never been made public. Sarah's hands shook as she reached for her phone to call Emma. "Did you see the news?" Emma asked before Sarah could speak. "Yes." Dad was innocent. All this time, he was telling the truth. Sarah felt a strange numbness settle over her. "Yes, it appears he was." "Mom, you have to call him. You have to tell him you're sorry." "I don't know if I can do that." "Why not? He was cleared, really cleared this time, not just acquitted. You were wrong about him." "I was wrong about the murders," Sarah corrected. "But I wasn't wrong about the lies. He still deceived me for 17 years. He still had a whole other life he never told me about." "But Mom..." "Emma, I know you want us to be a family again, but too much has happened. Too much trust has been broken." That night, Sarah lay awake thinking about David, wondering what he was feeling as he watched the news and realized that his name had finally been cleared. She thought about calling him, but couldn't bring herself to pick up the phone. Instead, she wrote him a letter. "David, I saw the news about the real killer being caught. I'm glad you've been vindicated, and I'm sorry you spent all these years under a cloud of suspicion. But I want you to understand something. Learning that you didn't kill Linda and her children doesn't change what happened between us. You still lied to me every day for 17 years. You still built our marriage on a foundation of deception. You still chose to keep running instead of trusting me with the truth. I don't regret turning you in. It was the right thing to do, even though it turns out you were innocent of murder. Sometimes the right thing and the easy thing are not the same. I hope you can find peace now that the truth has come out. I hope you can forgive me for not believing you when it mattered most. And I hope you can understand why I can't go back to who we were before. Sarah." She mailed the letter but never received a response. 5 years later, Sarah received a call from a hospital in Denver. David had suffered a heart attack and was asking for her. Emma had already flown out to be with him. Sarah bought a plane ticket that same day. She found David in the cardiac care unit, looking older and frailer than she remembered. Emma was sitting beside his bed, holding his hand. "He's been in and out of consciousness," Emma whispered, "but he keeps asking for you." Sarah approached the bed cautiously. David's eyes opened as she drew near, and he smiled, the same gentle smile she had fallen in love with all those years ago. "Sarah," he whispered, "you came." "Of course I came. I never stopped loving you. Not for one day." Tears filled Sarah's eyes. "I know. Do you think there's any chance for us? Now that you know the truth?" Sarah looked at this man who had been her husband, the father of her child, the center of her world for so many years. She thought about all the pain and betrayal, all the lost time, all the ways their story had been shaped by secrets and lies. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but I'm willing to try to find out." David squeezed her hand weakly. "That's all I ever wanted, just a chance." He died 3 days later, with Sarah and Emma at his bedside. His last words were, "Thank you for giving me the best years of my life." At the funeral, Sarah stood beside Emma as they buried the man who had been David Morse and Michael Patterson, and, in the end, simply a flawed human being who had made terrible choices and paid a terrible price. After the service, as Sarah was walking to her car, Janet Patterson approached her again. "I owe you an apology," Janet said. "All these years I believed your husband was my sister's killer. I'm sorry I was wrong." "You weren't wrong to want justice for your sister," Sarah replied. "You just wanted the right person to pay for what happened to her." "Do you regret it? Turning him in?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "No. I still think it was the right thing to do. Sometimes the truth is more important than what we want to be true." As she drove home from the cemetery, Sarah reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this point. She had lost her husband twice once when she discovered his deception, and again when she finally understood the man he really was. The safe had been gone from her house for over a decade, but its impact remained. It had taught her that everyone carries secrets, that trust is fragile, and that love alone is not always enough to overcome the weight of the past. But it had also taught her something else: that people are capable of change, that redemption is possible, and that sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is choose truth over comfort, even when that truth destroys everything you thought you knew about your life. In the end, Sarah realized, finding that safe had been both a curse and a blessing. It had cost her the illusion of the perfect marriage, but it had given her something more valuable: the knowledge that she was strong enough to face the truth, whatever it might be. And in a world full of hidden safes and buried secrets, that strength was perhaps the most precious thing of all.